So I'm going to go over a little project that I started just as a pet project on taking a look at all the BACnet sites that are exposed on the internet. And I'll start with, I said I wouldn't mention any vendor names or anything identifiable, so we'll keep it clean. Can we get the next slide? So I started back in July 2018 after hearing a bunch of people asking questions on how to set up their systems to get them out on the internet using BACnet. It's not really a great idea, but some of the things that crossed my head is it would be nice to track the trends, see what's going on in the market, and you definitely can do that to some degree. I wanted to see who the most common people were, look for patterns. Is it seasonal? Do we see some ebb and flows in that? What devices might be the most popular? Are we seeing increasing, decreasing trends with vendors' specific devices and whatnot? And also, obviously, if we find sites that we might have been involved with, to get them off the internet, and also some of the vendors that we're working closely with, if we spot their sites, try to get these things cleaned up. Next slide. So I'm not going to go too deep in the problems here, but mainly in BACnet, there's not a whole lot of security right now. I'll say little, but it's really none or close to none. There's some vendors that have implemented whitelisting. There's some vendors that have some switches in their devices that might make them only read-only points, or maybe they may be limiting what objects that they can actually write. I did find one router that has some encryption. I haven't looked into that. I just found it recently, but it didn't look too flexible. And then there's also the BACnet Firewall project by Joe Bender, which I think is a great project, but it hasn't really been brought to the market. There's also multiple crawlers I found looking constantly across the internet for BACnet devices. There's at least 5 or 6 different organizations that are constantly scanning. Obviously, if someone gets into these sites, they can shut the equipment down. They can possibly cause some damage. I think that's probably overblown in the media. I mean, most boilers have hardwired safeties. There's other things outside the control system that usually keeps things fairly safe. However, when you look at some of the devices, they use BACnet for their firmware updates, so atomic file transfers and whatnot. Some of these devices might be doing CRC checks to make sure that the firmware file is good, but if someone was malicious, they could obviously figure out how that CRC check works, send bogus malware up with the right check, and probably brick the device. And there's actually been some cases of this in the PLC world. So the Ukrainian power grid attack, if you dig into that, they actually brick some serial to Ethernet interfaces, corrupting the firmware in them. And then recently, the Triton attack framework, that was a little more insidious. They actually had a framework that was manipulating the programs within industrial, they call them SIS systems, which are safety systems that are overlooking the PLC. So these are the final safeties that keep the process safe. And these guys basically could write their own programs with their own tools. So that kind of stuff is probably going to stick in the PLC world, but it's definitely possible in the building automation world. Next slide. A couple good papers that are out there. The BACnet WAN Security Threat Assessment. If you really want to look and see what some of the nasty things someone could do, that's probably a good paper to take a read on and take a look. I'll note that's from 2003, where they said most of them are not connected to the internet. Well, in 2003, that might have been true. Today, I would say that most of the systems that are going in have some sort of connectivity. Hopefully, it's behind a VPN or whatnot, but as we'll see here soon, there's quite a few that are just being dumped right on the internet. This other paper is the application threat. So they're talking about a DDoS, a distributed denial of service attack using BACnet devices. It wasn't all that interesting of an angle. The application factor is not that big compared to some of the other ways. But what was interesting is they do a lot of talking on the types of devices they found, who the most popular vendors were, with some numbers and breakdown. That really validated what I was seeing because everything kind of lined up. And the other thing they did, most places are only looking at 47808 for the port. These guys actually scanned all the different ports, and they found that 47% of the devices you're missing, so almost half the devices I'm seeing, there's quite a few more. I'm only getting half of them. So It's an interesting read, just with the different stats and what they saw. It's pretty much the same thing I'm seeing today. They also talked to CERT to try to get these removed and didn't have a whole lot of effect. Next slide. So I'm using Shodan. Shodan's very popular. It's well known. It's easy to use. They try to crawl the entire IPv4 space monthly. They look for well-known protocols. So they're not scanning every port that's available. You know, every device has got 65,000 ports. They're only looking for popular protocols. So you're not going to find, you know, like BACnet. They're only looking at 47808. They're not looking at the other ones. When they find an open port, they'll probe it, and any response, they keep that and they call that their banner. So when you go, the example here at the bottom is what a website request would look like. And you kind of see that, you know, you're getting the version numbers of all the software, or a lot of the software that's run on that web server. So if you knew that Apache 1.3.26 had some vulnerability, you can go into Shodan and just say, hey, give me all the websites with that version. So it's there's a lot of data there that might be useful. Next slide. So on top of that banner, you're going to get the host IP, timestamp of the last time they scanned it, the banner that we just looked at. They also do a host name lookup, reverse DNS. They're going to give you the AS number that controls that IP space. The country and the city, it's geolocated, so it's not always that great, but it's going to get you in the ballpark of where that site is in the majority of the cases. Next slide. And again, you know, when they're looking for like SSL on port 443, they're going to get the BACnet certificates. They're going to get all the versions supported. You know, mail servers, they're going to get the server halal and the same type of SSL stuff if the server supports that. Niagara, they actually look for Niagara as well, which you're going to get the version numbers, the station names. And BACnet, if you go to the next slide, this is a typical BACnet quote-unquote banner that Shodan's going to give you. And one thing to look at here, you're going to get the device instance of this device that's been exposed. But in this case, this is a perfect example. What I've X'd out here is this is the company's name and their partial address. You know it's the boiler room. The vendor name, obviously, it's going to tell you whose controller that is, the software versions, the model name. They're going to dump the full BBMD table and the FDG, the foreign device table, essentially. So that's, you know, this site would be very, very easy. With the geolocation, and I have the customer's name and address, I don't know why someone would put that information in their device, but it's fairly common. Next slide. Using Shodan, the nice thing about Shodan is you can get a couple of results for free. So you go to their website, you do search, you do need an account if you want to search for a specific protocol, but that's free. It's $10 for 10,000 results. So it costs next to nothing to get tens of thousands of results. You can get some general reports that'll kind of give you an idea where these hosts are, and you can see the US, you know, North America is pretty hot, and then the rest of the country, world's a little lower. And they're not the only source. There's definitely other sources that you can get this kind of information from. Next slide. So the way I'm using Shodan is essentially I go to their website, I do a scan, they give me a CSV file. It's just easy for me to work with. I'm familiar with VBA and Excel. It's very easy for me to just pull a CSV file in and then sort it out. The one thing that kind of sucks is the banner is just one blob of text. So I got to go in there and kind of parse out the information that I want. And then some interesting things I kind of found. You know, obviously not everything with 47808 open is BACnet. So I do have to sort some of that out. Some devices seem to reply with a BACnet error. I haven't quite figured out what's going on with that with Shodan. It almost seems like it's an error in their side. But I don't go out and hit any of these sites to try and figure out what's going on there. And then since I'm using scripting, I want to try and figure out who is vendor X. You know, give me all the occurrences of vendor X. I found a lot of these vendors that just seem to have an identity crisis. There'll be XYZ Inc. period, and I'll have let's say 500 hits there. Then I'll have XYZ Inc. no period, and I'll have another 250 hits, and then it'll be building automation and industrial. It's just crazy. Sometimes it's capitalization. which I have some theories. Yeah. It took a bit of work to clean up the list and try and group these people together. And some of the stuff that shakes out, obviously if I see, let's say 750 results, and then I have 2 that are spelled wrong, the caps is wrong, it's missing a comma. I mean, those 2 are really interesting all of a sudden, because why do I have so many? How did these 2 devices, that's something that an integrator wouldn't normally be able to set the vendor. That would have to come from the manufacturer.
Friday.
It could be Friday, but man, they only did it on 2. It must not have been a popular model.
So you're going in and hacking devices and correcting results?
I'm not hacking anything. I'm just getting results and sifting through and seeing what shakes out. So, and then after I sort this all out, I kind of generate some totals, some basic statistics, generate some charts. Nothing too fancy. This was like a weekend project to write some scripts a minute and work with this data and see what I could get to shake out. Next slide. So the results. Next. So this is interesting. I was seeing a pretty general trend for BACnet going up, and yesterday I pulled this once a month. And I'm not too specific on the day of the month, but yesterday was the first of this month, so I pulled the results. And by goodness, I don't know what's quite going on with the trend all of a sudden, but Shodan's results have dropped down big time. I think the list, just off the top of my head, I think I had like 18,500 last month before I sorted anything out. This month it was down to 17,200-ish, and then of course I sort out all the crap from there. I'll say one thing about Shodan results is there's no month January there. I got the results from them in January and all the numbers looked right, but as soon as I applied my filtering to it, it became clear something was wrong with the results, because it was like Alibaba Cloud Service had 90% of these devices, or that was the ASN that was attached, the owner of that IP block. All this stuff was coming back to there, so I just threw all the results out. It was not, something was wrong. So I don't know, we'll see what happens next month. I have a feeling that something in their results is off. I mean, it's pretty general trend that it was increasing with some dips. Or maybe this might be, I'm kind of wondering if I'm going to see at the end of the year, a lot of projects hit in the summertime, they turn over, late fall, whatnot. This could be maybe we're seeing sites turn over, get plugged into the internet real quick as a temporary thing before IT gets on board, and then, siphons this off and gets it permanent. Maybe that's what's going on here. I only have 10 months or so. It's really hard to draw yearly trends here without having a ton of extra data. I'll need a couple years worth of data before I see, is there some real patterns here? Next slide. Yeah, so I'll just talk in general a little bit on some of the stuff I'm seeing. So some of the most popular vendors, which I thought was really odd, some of the most popular vendors are ones that I wouldn't consider the most common in the market. I've been 20 years, we do a lot of buildings in a lot of different markets. We know who the major players are, and some of the ones that just bubbled up to the top here didn't quite shake out. Thinking about that more, it's probably vendors that use BACnet for all aspects, their programming, their firmware updates. Some vendors use other protocols and other tools, so there may not be a need for them. They may not be exposing BACnet. If you're using a common little box like this made by a manufacturer, a lot of people will bring all their devices up into that BACnet, use another protocol elsewhere, and if they're doing their management and whatnot, it'll be on that other protocol. So that would probably explain why we don't see stuff exactly lining up how I would think we would. And then there's the least common stuff. We shake out the list and you start looking at the bottom and it's like, wow, there's this company that I know that I've dealt with in the past for SCADA systems. And I'm seeing XYZ company gateway, and what else did I find? I found fire alarm system gateways. I found laboratory control, fume hood control type stuff out there. So it's pretty interesting at the bottom of the list as well, and kind of scary what actually is out there. And then the other thing was the high number of sites that we could definitely identify who they were. People putting their addresses, customer names, that kind of stuff in the device name. It's probably not a good idea. And then the BACnet honeypots. This is what I really think I'm seeing. When I find someone miscapitalizing a vendor name, that's almost certainly someone using like the BACnet, the SourceForge BACnet stack and probably setting something up, and they missed a period. And that's why I see one occurrence versus 1,000 of the other way. Next slide. So after I kind of shook that out, I thought, it might be interesting to see what is Shodan doing exactly. How are they scanning these devices? Next slide. So I decided to set up my own. I used real hardware and software, so it's a real program that's running in a real site. So it'd be very hard to tell that it wasn't a real device. And then basically walled it off in its little garden. I'm using a Raspberry Pi with a passive network tap, so I'm just right in line capturing what goes in, what goes out. And I'm a big capturing that for months now. And then I use Wireshark, and I can kind of export that out to Excel, sort out the unique IP addresses, and then I have some scripts that kind of try to go out and do some reverse lookups and try to identify who owns these and try and track them back. Next slide. So these are all the different people for sure that were easy to just go back and track. In the University of Michigan, you can go right to these websites, and most of them will tell you that that's what they're doing. Like University of Michigan, they make it clear. Some of these other ones, they just say that they're scanning the internet for security, but they don't specifically say that they're doing it for BACnet, but they certainly, they hit my controller, and they were easy to track back to. And then there's some other ones that are not so easy to track back to. They come from far-flung parts of the world. Their IPs don't, their domains, and there's no reverse DNS right to their domain. They don't make it easy to figure out who it is, and they're probably a little more questionable, but I haven't seen anything too crazy going on. I did have one guy drive by and do a full scan on my honeypot to see what was going on there, which at that point, I don't have 100 sensors hooked up here, so it probably would have, anyone that was looking to do harm would have probably looked at the data and said, this don't smell right. Next slide. So at least what I'm seeing, just on one little device, by no means the internet at large, is it's probably, in 7 days a week, you're probably going to see someone come by, do a drive-by, at least 6 out of the 7 days. You might get a day where you don't have someone, but if you put a device out there, it's going to make someone's list within 48 hours, almost guaranteed. Outside of the guys that are listed there, it's pretty rare, but there's definitely some other people sniffing around, knocking on the door here and there. I haven't seen anything too crazy. And then just running a realistic honeypot. I mean, if I can do my little scan and I'm seeing these misspelled names and mispunctuation, everything's really got to match. I mean, if it was someone trying to fool me with one of our controllers we work with, I'm going to know if your firmware version doesn't match the controller type, or it was just one that was never issued. The other thing to think about too is, Shodan and a lot of these sites say you're going to geolocate your IP. So if you're claiming to be some site in California, yet you're showing up in Mexico, it might be another thing that turns someone off and just ignores it. Realistic sensor readings. Again, if your data is all invalid, someone's probably going to think that this is not, you're not going to get to the interesting part of what they're trying to do, obviously. And then if someone does start to tamper around, are your sensors going to react? If they override your hot water valve, is your discharge air temp going to climb up? Because the first time something doesn't line up, these people may just move on and you'll never see exactly what they're trying to do. And then I would say, I just run a one. That certainly doesn't make, these other guys run hundreds or thousands of them scattered across the world. So if you really wanted to get a good understanding of what people are trying to do with these, you'd need a sizable bit more effort than I'm putting into it. Next slide. That's it. Questions?
So my question is that this was amazing, and it's a great eye-opener to everyone out there that's connecting devices and bringing it to a BACnet network. That's wonderful. But taken away from this, what would you recommend for system integrators out there to better protect on how they're bringing their devices up into a public, up to BACnet, but also publicizing this into the internet where they can have, drive-bys and
Yeah.
hacking and things like that.
So-
I'm not aware of.
Most of the vendors have information on what to do, and it almost always boils down to using a VPN and just taking yourself. Once you're behind a VPN, you're invisible to all these scanners, and you got a far better level of protection than just plugging a cable modem into a controller. It's crazy.
When you've done your scans and found devices, can you actually get it down to the object level?
Let me be clear. I don't do the scans. Shodan does. I'm just taking their data.
When you have time.
And I don't.
No, you can't.
Yeah. I'll just generally say, yeah. If you know what you're doing, you could get in and start playing around, or you could. Yeah, I don't want to go into a lot. I'll just say yes.
Have you looked at repeat offense consistency? How often an IP it's found by Shodan stays in Shodan for a long time? Or are they just coming up and going down? You had raw numbers.
I put all these together in spreadsheets and just whipped some code together over a weekend. I really need to, if I want to take my research to the next level, I need to set up a database, run all these in, and then I can start running database queries like that. And I think I probably will get to that at some point when I get a free weekend. But I'll, at least at the small subset, so vendors that we're interested in with trying to get them cleaned up, I would say if that's any indication that a lot of them they're on and they stay long term.
How does Shogun present their position in the market? What are they here to help with?
Make $10 by giving. They market themselves a couple different ways. For like researchers that just want to try and find these devices, obviously hackers are going to use the same service. And then the other thing that they typically do is if you're an owner and you own a block of IPs, they have some services that'll notify you if there's anything that turns up on their radar.
That would have been the hopeful objective. Okay.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the power of the buck. If you got cash in hand, someone above or below board will take it.
Any other questions for Al?
No, it's great.
All right, thank you.
I'd like to just
You're welcome.
make a couple of points for a second. It's absolutely relevant and businesses in this community have known that there has not been any measurable security on BACnet for a long time. As we've discussed in some other meetings and we've had some presentations, this has not gone unnoticed by the BACnet committee. For the last decade, we have been working diligently with Jim Butler as chairman of the BACnet IT working group, with Cisco, with most of the large players in the industry, to come up with an IT secured variant of BACnet, basically using WebSockets as a transport layer, using traditional TLS security. And the exciting thing is after 10 hard years in the standards committee, that's just coming down off the jacks now. Jim, would you like to give a word? It's basically just come out to its third public review last week, and we hope that the standard will be published by the end of the year, and many companies are already working on technology around it. Jim?
Yeah, so those of you who were at the, I think it was the fall meeting, right? Spent last fall. Saw a presentation I gave on BACnet SC, we're calling it, for Secure Connect. And BACnet SC is based on TLS, which is a fundamental technology for securing communication over the World Wide Web. And it will provide encryption and also device authentication, so that only devices that have a certificate signed by the proper certificate authority will be able to communicate with other BACnet SC devices on the same network. the BACnet committee has been working on this for a while. We did complete our third public review draft, which is off to the ASHRAE editors now. And hopefully within a few weeks, you'll be able to read what we've been working on over the past couple of years, the latest revision. And you can even provide comments if you'd like. The fewer the better. But no, seriously, if you find significant problems, we'd like to hear what you think those are, because you know, I'm pretty sure that none of us wants to put something out in the security domain that we think isn't pretty solid. So we appreciate your feedback and your interest. Thanks.
And in future groups, we'll do more presentations as the standard comes out, and we'll keep everybody apprised as to how it's going commercially and who's doing what. So as that unfolds, but just wanted to get that in. That security's coming. It's been a long time coming, but it's I think it's a pretty serious effort, and I hope you all take the time to review it. Thanks. Sveta?
Can I say something? So for anyone, like I spent a lot of time on the BACnet International group, and I was present with your last presentation, and I was blown away. And I'm still learning. I've only been in this particular industry for the last few years, although I've learned a lot by joining this group and working with other peers and what have you. But I encourage everyone here, seriously, you did an amazing presentation last fall on this particular topic. So take the time, review it. It goes back way from the beginning of birth of BTL, BACnet certification, and where we've grown, and right up to the timeline and where it's going to take us. So you've done a really great job.
Thank you.
Looking forward to the third revision and approval, and then actually implementing the extra security.
Question for you. Security certificates, what's the plan for management and market delivery?
So it's our expectation that the large customers, for example, colleges in Cambridge, will have their own structure for managing certificates that are used in their organization. I mean, IT departments will provide the oversight and will do the signing of the certificates using certificate authorities that they maintain. What is less clear is how this will work with the mid-sized customers, many of whom are not going to have IT departments with the maturity of colleges in Cambridge, for example. I think that the vendors will have to take a much greater role in helping those mid-sized customers manage the whole process of issuing certificates and getting the proper signatures.
And yes, every VAV box is going to have a certificate.
I mean, obviously the concern is cost impact.
Of course, security is not free.
Yeah.
Andy's got a point?
Just a background, actually. So, many of the people in this room are technical, right? Engineering is kind of what I like myself. The problem with security is only partly technical. And if you look at all the data, it's the small part. The big part of security has to do with people. Building operating, as opposed to, say, the IT world, it's way, way worse. And all the technical things we can do aren't going to fix the problem or even make a big dent in it if we don't also fix the cultural problem of the discipline that IT has developed around security has to become kind of, well, of course, as opposed to, well, that's stupid. That's a mindset thing we have to change in our organizations and in our community. Or the technical things that Jim and the committee and the larger BACnet community have built really won't help. Because something like 95% of the problems that show up in security are oops problems,
So
not technical problems.
What is your vision, Andy, for what BACnet International is going to do to help us solve that problem?
We're going to turn to symmetrics and say, okay. No, I think there really needs to be, we're talking about doing education in two components. Education of suppliers about BACnet SC and how to implement it and why they're going to have it really quickly. And users on waiting for BACnet SC is a foolish thing to do because you have a lot of work. It has nothing to do with technical, and you need to get that done. So we're looking at maybe a two-part educational program, one focused explicitly on users and getting them ready on the cultural side while we're finishing up the technical work.
And to some degree, it's fair to say if you don't fix part one, part two isn't going to be as helpful.
It will hardly make a dent, according to the statistics.
Any other general comments on security before we move on?
One question. Is BACnet SC going to be compatible with existing BACnet protocols?
Yes, using BACnet routers, you'll be able to connect BACnet SC networks to your existing BACnet network.